It's just so cool. I'm running trains outside. That was over a year ago, and I've been running and maintaining this little garden railroad ever since. I'm going to tell you what I've loved about it and what I've learned. Now, garden railroading is a sort of niche within a niche in terms of model railroading. Model railroading is already a niche hobby, and then garden railroading is an even smaller niche hobby. But garden railroading is the entry point for a part of model railroading that tackles the outdoors. You use techniques for building your layout that are more akin to building an actual railroad rather than a model. You're using real dirt, real rock ballast, real plants, and real techniques for leveling and grading your track. Now, my garden railroad is one of the smaller ones that you can build. This is a 10 by 6 foot garden railroad, and it runs a simple loop of track, doesn't even have turnouts. Now, that doesn't mean that I haven't had some of the challenges that larger garden railroads have. But before I go over that, I want to go over what I've loved about my garden railroad. The biggest thing that I love about having a garden railroad is the relaxation and family fun that it has brought. My kids love running trains on this. They love putting rocks and dirt in the gondolas and controlling the trains because this is a simple DC throttle and it's easy for them to control. I actually went on eBay and bought a few of the old Bachmann little big hauler pieces so that they could have something to run that I didn't mind them handling. I was also able to pick up the classic LGB passenger set used at a train show for a really great price. I'm talking about less than 50% of its original price. I've always wanted one of these, and this is perfect. When it comes to garden railroads, I love smaller narrow gauge locomotives and rolling stock. So when you see mine, I'm typically going to be running the 1:24 and 1:20.5, so the G scale and the F scale. Now, for those that don't know, there are several scales that run on garden railroad track, G gauge track. That's going to be your 1/32nd, your 1/29th, your 1/24th, and your 1:20.5, which is actually technically something called F scale, but that's a whole nother video. My favorite to run are these little narrow gauge locomotives. I also love European models for garden railroads, as well as little porter engines. I really want one of those LGB porters at some point. I gotta start putting some money away for that. The biggest maintenance thing that I've had to do was adding ballast to the track. The ballast shifts and settles, and my track had begun to sag and disconnect in some places. So I went and got a 5-gallon bucket of small driveway gravel and reballasted the track. Remember, when you're ballasting for garden railroad, you want something that's a little bit of a rougher rock. Don't use something like smooth pea gravel or river rock because that's going to shift really easy when it rains. Now, this only took one 5-gallon bucket to level out my track here, but it's a small garden railroad, so if you have a bigger one, it's definitely going to take more. The other side of garden railroading is the garden part. So, plants. Of the original plants that I planted, only one didn't survive to the following year. Now, I like planting perennials and evergreens for garden railroads. I wanted to ensure that plants come back in relatively the same location. And even though I lost one, the ones that made it looked great. Now, they don't look great right now because I've just been going through a heat wave after shooting this, so they're a little brown and dark and not doing great, but trust me, they look great when they're blooming. The biggest surprise was this stone crop, which is a succulent, and it really thrived, and it did exactly what I wanted to do and just started to spread out all over the area that I planted it. It's actually the first one that I've had to prune back from the track, but otherwise it's staying nice and low and it's covering the ground very nicely. So what have I learned from this past year? The first thing is I have learned that garden railroads, even small ones, require a decent amount of maintenance. Between the plants, the track, and any weather-related issues, garden railroads require a lot of upkeep. The biggest issue I had was weeds finding their way into the garden. They exploited any tiny weakness in the weed fabric that I put down at the beginning. I also had grass from my yard creeping in. My yard is Bermuda, so Bermuda creeps along the ground, and it was quite insidious into its growth in the garden. And I still haven't gotten all of it out because it's weaved into some of the stone crop, and I'm not sure about pulling all that out. There are several things that I am considering for the future of my little garden railroad. One, I want to get more small engines and rolling stock. I also need bigger storage for the area of my trains. I run primarily LGB equipment, but I want to pick up some Pico stuff as well. In particular, I want to get one of Pico's 25-ton switchers. I just love those little things. And I love small engines in general for garden railroads. Now, there is one thing that I really wanted to get into when I got back into garden railroading. Now, when I was a kid, I actually did have a small garden railroad, but it never really ran well because I was a kid and I didn't know how to build it properly. But I saw this special on HGTV where they showed a bunch of garden railroads, and one of them was Jack Verducci's Crystal Springs Railroad. And this lit the fire of saying, at some point, I wanted to get a live steam locomotive. And guess what? I have bought my first live steam locomotive. Next week, I'm going to be showing off that live steam locomotive and showing my first foray into the world of live steam. And it's an interesting one. It's definitely different, but it's a lot of fun and it's very satisfying. So I can't wait to show you guys that. So thank you all so much for watching. If you haven't already, check out my second channel, Jimmy's Trains. If you just want to watch some model trains running on a layout, that's the place for you. Until next time, I'm Jimmy from the DIY and Digital. Stay safe, be kind, and happy railroading.